Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Building Resilience Through Innovation, EDA's Sprint Challenge. I'm Brett Schwartz, Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation and head up our organization's Economic Resilience and Diversification Training portfolio. There's been so much excitement ever since EDA's Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship announced the Sprint Challenge earlier this month, and we're glad to host this webinar in conjunction with EDA and SSTI. Sprint, as you'll hear more about on the webinar today, is a tremendous opportunity to face head-on some of the major economic, health, and safety challenges posed by COVID-19 through strategic planning, creative thinking, and new partnerships. We at the NATO Research Foundation are particularly excited about Sprint because it positions economic development districts as key partners in this important effort. The Research Foundation is affiliated with the National Association of Development Organizations, which represents regional development organizations all across the country, including the National Network of Economic Development Districts, or EDDs. Now, EDDs are multi-jurisdictional, most often multi-county planning and economic development organizations that serve as a key delivery mechanism for EDA and other federal agencies. These public-based entities play an invaluable role in fostering intergovernmental collaboration among federal, state, and local officials, deliver and manage federal and state programs, and work to solve area-wide issues to address fundamental building blocks required for competitive and sustainable communities and economies. Now, among the many responsibilities in serving their regions is the planning, writing, and implementation of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS. Now, you'll hear much more about EDDs and CEDS later on in this webinar as it pertains to the Sprint Challenge. But in a nutshell, the CEDS is a locally based, regionally driven economic development planning process and document that creates the space for your region to identify its strengths and weaknesses, bring together key partners, and generate good jobs, diversify the economy, and spur economic growth. Now, we believe in the value of the CEDS process and are thrilled that the Sprint Challenge leverages the CEDS and the role of economic development districts in this effort. And at the NATO Research Foundation, we're in the 4th year of an EDA-funded capacity building project called Stronger CEDS, Stronger Regions. We've developed a mix of educational resources and training materials on all things related to the CEDS. So feel free to reach out to me directly to learn more or visit our CEDS clearinghouse, which has all of our materials online and for free at cedscentral.com. So that's cedscentral.com. And you can also access that website through our NATO website at nato.org. So we're really happy to be co-sponsoring today's webinar with our colleagues at SSTI. So with that, I'd like to turn things over for a few minutes to Jason Rittenberg, who is the Policy and Development Director, to share some thoughts as well. So Jason, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Brett. Thank you for helping to coordinate today and as well as for the introduction here. As many of you are aware, SSTI's mission is to strengthen initiatives to create a better future through science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We've worked with EDA for many years, particularly on the Regional Innovation Now Build to Scale program. And we're happy to see EDA utilizing part of their CARES funding specifically to work to strengthen regional innovation economies. That being said, there are technical requirements to this funding that don't exist with the Build to Scale program. And so we're happy to be on this webinar today and making it available and aware to our members so that organizations like venture development organizations and other innovation-focused nonprofits can understand these differences. So we're glad that EDA is offering these webinars to get into the details of the technical requirements of this program, and we hope that a combination of early awareness and flexibility on everyone's part is going to make this effort successful. Obviously, these are relatively unprecedented times and incredible challenges in many of your economies, and so we understand and completely believe how important it is to get funding like this out and available in your regions as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So with that, thank you very much, Brett, and I'll turn things back over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Jason. Really appreciate that. And just a heads up to everyone tuning in, we are recording today's webinar, so a copy of the recording as well as the slides will be available in a few days at the EDA website as well as the Sprint Challenge website, which I hope you've been able to explore as well. If you do have a question for our panelists today, feel free to type them in on the questions box on the right side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as you can. We've got a really large group on today, so please try to keep those questions specific to what might be of interest to all of attendees, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. If not, you'll have contact information for everyone to follow up with staff afterwards. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dana Gartsky, who is performing the delegated duties of the Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development. He was appointed to this position on March 23rd and hit the ground running to lead the Economic Development Administration. Mr. Gartsky is responsible for fulfilling the agency's mission of leading the federal economic development agenda. And during his tenure at EDA, he has advanced critical priorities, including opportunity zones, disaster recovery and resiliency, infrastructure, and workforce development. So Dana, I'm so glad to have you on the call today to share your thoughts about the Sprint program and EDA's vision for economic yours.
Very good. Delighted to be here. Good morning and afternoon to everybody across America. Thank you, Brett, for the introduction, and thank you to you and Jason for facilitating our discussion today. Both NATO and SSTI have been devoted partners to EDA for many, many years, as Jason indicated, and I can't thank you enough for helping us spread the word about the CARES Act funding Congress made available to EDA to help our communities respond to this coronavirus. This webinar is just the latest example of the assistance that your organizations have provided, and we're greatly appreciative of you hosting us today. As many of you know, I'm a professional engineer by training, having worked 15 years in the private sector as a design and test engineer. And this little corner of EDA called Innovation and Entrepreneurship is one that truly captures my imagination. And that's why I'm very excited at the diverse array of stakeholders that are joining us today, many of whom may be new to the work that we do at EDA. These are folks that do technology-based economic development organizations, capital investment initiatives, city, county, and state-level entrepreneurship support programs, university-led accelerator and incubator programs, and many, many more. To everyone online with us today, thank you for carving out some time to being with us. 2 weeks ago today, the Cabinet Secretary for the Department of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, held an event in St. Petersburg, Florida, to announce the launch of EDA's new Scaling Pandemic Resilience Through Innovation and Technology, or SPRINT. This $25 million national competition authorized under the CARES Act will enable organizations around the country to address the economic, health, and safety risks caused by the pandemic through new entrepreneurship and innovation. We're excited that this vital competition is now open. We're pleased that you are able to join us today to learn more. The fact is, throughout our history, intrepid American innovators have always been at the forefront of problem solving. Today, we're counting on our innovators to help the country through this current pandemic and better prepare us for any future occurrences. It's critical to develop the technologies and supply chains needed to respond to the coronavirus pandemic and to bolster the support networks and resources entrepreneurs need to pivot and excel in this new operating environment and help build a more resilient regional economy for the future. Through the Sprint Challenge, we'll provide grants for innovation and entrepreneurship that help communities and regions unlock the potential of America's entrepreneurs and grow innovative, technology-driven businesses. Today, you'll be provided details on eligibility, the strategic goals for our program, the award amounts, general descriptions of those awards, the competition timeline, and much more. So in closing, I want to thank my team, the director at OIE, Emily Miller, and the entire EDA Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the work that they do to empower communities so that entrepreneurs can launch companies, scale technologies, and create new jobs for tomorrow. EDA continues to lead on the cutting edge of technology-based economic development. Through EDA's portfolio of grant competitions, these initiatives accelerate high-quality job growth, support the next generation of industry-leading companies, and catalyze economic opportunities across the United States. The OIE team and everyone at EDA is excited to work with you today to tackle the unprecedented challenges brought about by this pandemic. So I eagerly look forward to your creative ideas that will propel our nation forward on alleviating and even defeating this pandemic. So with that, let me give it back now to Brett and my EDA team. It was great to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. Look forward to your creativity. God bless in your work ahead.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jana, for your remarks, and thanks again so much for your leadership. March 23rd was quite a date to take on this responsibility, so we really appreciate all you've done for EDA and the whole network of local and regional partners. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great webinar.
Thanks so much. So yeah, let's get to it now. And I'm really happy to now throw the program over to two incredible staff at EDA who are leading the effort behind this sprint challenge. They are Emily Miller, who's serving as the Acting Director for Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at EDA, and Amanda Costi, an Economic Development Specialist on the OIE team. These two are a tremendous asset to EDA, and will share with you the key details of this challenge and also make sure you have all the information that you need to craft an application. So with that, I'm going to give presenter mode over to Amanda, and you guys will take it from here. So thanks again.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everyone. Today, our goal is to, sorry, my screen, there we go. Sorry. Today, our goal is to learn about the Sprint Challenge and better understand EDA's grant process. We'll give you an overview about OIE, a little bit about the CARES Act, dive into our strategic focus areas, and actually walk you through an application checklist for this funding opportunity, as well as address some of your questions. But before we do that, we should introduce ourselves. As Brett said, my name is Amanda Costi. I'm an Economic Development Specialist in the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at EDA, and I'll allow my colleague Emily to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning for those on the West Coast. Good afternoon for those of you joining us today. I really appreciate the overwhelming interest in the program. Really excited to talk to you today. My name is Emily Miller. I'm the Acting Director for the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Been with the EDA now for about 2 years, and just really excited to share this opportunity with you. So a little bit about us. You've heard bits and pieces from Dana and others on the introduction, but our office, OIE, we love our acronyms here in government. We are an office within the U.S. Economic Development Administration, which is a bureau within the Department of Commerce. And our mission is to empower communities so that entrepreneurs can launch companies, scale technologies, and create the jobs of tomorrow. We do this through a few ways. Our whole mission is really all about technology-based economic development. The primary ways we do this are promoting thought leadership through our National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, also through federal collaboration, so working with other federal agencies in the innovation and entrepreneurship space. And most importantly, probably why all of you are here today, our grant programs. And like Dana mentioned, our $25 million Sprint Challenge is the newest and latest national competition grant program that OIE has launched. So let's get into the details and we'll give you more information. Great. So I'm sure many of you know about the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It was signed into law and provides EDA with $1.5 billion for economic development assistance programs to help communities prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. EDA CARES Act Recovery Assistance, which is being administered under the authority of our Bureau's very flexible Economic Adjustment Assistance, or EAA program, provides a wide range of financial assistance to communities and regions as they respond to and recover from the impacts of the pandemic. EDA intends to deploy its CARES Act funding as quickly, effectively, and efficiently as possible, and in a manner that meets communities' needs. There are many ways we do this, as you can tell on the slide here. The EAA program does work through the planning and technical assistance, the capitalization and recapitalization of revolving loan funds. We've also funded construction and infrastructure projects, but really what we're here to talk to you about today are these innovation grants. That is really at the heart of what the Sprint Challenge is all about. And we are seeking projects that are preventing, preparing for, and responding to the pandemic, as well as future global health emergencies through the power of innovation and entrepreneurship. I do want to point out here, as some of the speakers have already mentioned, for those of you familiar with EDA or new to EDA, the Sprint Challenge is slightly different from other OIE programs. The statutory authority for the Sprint Challenge is PWEDA, so that governs EDA's Economic Adjustment Assistance Program. Because of that, features of the Sprint Challenge differ from other OIE programs. Some of those changes include required alignment with Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS, a higher maximum grant to match ratio, and different eligible entity types. So we will talk about each of these components in depth in the presentation today to make sure that you are 100% prepared for submitting your application. So I'm really pleased to announce the launch of EDA's new national competition, like Dana mentioned, the Scaling Pandemic Resilience Through Innovation and Technology, or the Sprint Challenge. The Sprint Challenge will harness America's entrepreneurship potential to respond to the challenges caused by the coronavirus pandemic, and we're really excited to announce it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Amanda, and we will take some questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. So as mentioned, this is a $25 million challenge. For fiscal year 2020, the Sprint Challenge really aims to enable regional innovation economies to rapidly address the economic, health, and safety risks caused by the coronavirus pandemic through entrepreneurship and innovation. When we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're not necessarily talking about small business. We're talking about high growth entrepreneurship, scalable companies, tech-enabled, and we'll work to support that. So this program is really focused on tying the economic entry to the program response. We're looking for applicants that can show program intent to address a direct need in their region caused by the coronavirus pandemic and address it through entrepreneurship and innovation. We want applicants to take an innovative approach to building resilience in their economies. This funding opportunity is a flexible opportunity to address lots of different areas and needs in the short term to the long term as well. So for example, when we think about programs for the Sprint Challenge in the short term, we might think about how do we rapidly help companies pivot business models, supply chains needed to prevent and prepare for. In the midterm, we might be working on developing support networks. And in the long-term strategy, we might focus on how is this building a more resilient regional economy for the future. These are all various visions that you can address throughout your program and your application. Applicants might often ask if they need to focus on all three of these short-term, mid-term, and long-term results. And the answer is not necessarily. It would be beneficial to help tell your story, but we're looking at local and regional projects to zero in, again, on specific injury in your community and really focus on building that recovery and resilience from the pandemic. Before we jump into too many details, who's eligible for this funding opportunity? As Emily mentioned, this is an EAA opportunity, so it's a little bit different than other OIE programs for those who are familiar with those. Our first qualified eligible entity, of course, is Economic Development Districts. Also, state, county, city, and other political subdivisions of a state are an eligible entity. Indian tribes or a consortium of Indian tribes. Institutions of higher education or a consortium of institutions of higher education. And finally, eligible entities include public or private nonprofit organizations or associations. However, for our nonprofit folks on the call today, you must be acting in cooperation with officials of a political subdivision of a state. And what that means is we'll need a letter of support within your application showing that your nonprofit is working with political subdivision of a state, that they're aware of this project and are showing their support for it, that it's in alignment with what's going on. You'll see, as a quick note on the slides, at the bottom right-hand corner of a lot of the slides, you'll see something that says NOFO section C1 in this instance. I just want to point that out. The NOFO is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. We're going to say that term a lot here today. This is the Notice of Funding on grants.gov, the application entity. And just want to point those out for those who may be looking back at these slides later and wondering where to find out more information and the fine print on these various characteristics of the presentation. I want to reiterate here that similar to other OIE programs, our funding cannot be used as direct investment into a private company or a startup company directly. Unlike some of our other programs, private-public partnerships are also not allowable as an eligible entity under this grant opportunity. I just want to reiterate, when we think through the larger entrepreneurial ecosystems, the target applicant for the Sprint Challenge is not the entrepreneur or individual or the scalable startup company itself. It's those organizations that are supporting the entrepreneurs that are our target. Think, as we just mentioned, economic development districts, community-based organizations, incubators, angel networks, etc. CARES Act has done a great job and done a lot for small businesses. However, that is not part of this grant opportunity. It's not necessarily just about design or preference. Legally, we cannot support for-profit entities as an eligible entity for these grants. So for anyone out there who is a startup founder and is looking for direct investment through this program, unfortunately, that is not allowable. So now that we've gone through eligibility, let's talk through the funding opportunity. Your organization can apply for up to $500,000 for a 12-month period of performance, or up to $750,000 for an 18-month period of performance. We would encourage you to think through what makes most sense for your project. What timeline makes most sense, which level of funding. Again, you don't have to apply for up to the full amount, but you do, that is the limitation behind it. You'll see it a few times throughout this presentation, but take out your pens, put it on your calendar, write a post-it. Applications are due December 3rd, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. It's an important deadline. If it's late, it will not be accepted. These periods of performance are shorter than some other ones. This grant is really designed for programmatic intent and for everyone, for applicants who are selected to really jump right into the work and really addressing that economic injury from the pandemic. How to do that? Well, applicants will need to submit a program or project proposal as part of the application. We've outlined 4 strategic priority areas here that you might want to focus your application on. This is not limited to, this is just areas that we decided were a strategic priority focus area for us. So we're going to dive into detail about all 4 of these here. Just to name them quickly, we have biotechnology, health security and supply chain, regional, national, and government connectivity, access to capital, and entrepreneurship support. The first one, biotechnology, health security, and supply chain innovation. There are some examples listed here, but the idea here is to support the commercialization of technologies and supply chain resources to address specific needs in these areas. Emily, do you want to give an example about what this might look like?
Yeah, I wanted to pause here for a moment and give a few examples. We've had a lot of people get in touch with us kind of looking at these 4 focus areas that we put in the notice of funding opportunity. And so I wanted to use this as a time to give a couple examples. And I want to say upfront that this is not a prescriptive list. We are really encouraging innovative approaches here, but I do just want to give some examples to get some ideas started. And I've also noticed a few questions in the chat. Hopefully it's pretty clear by now that we cannot fund startups directly. So we're really looking at these intermediary support organizations like Amanda mentioned. So some examples here. There could be, let's say, a biotechnology or life science innovation program. Maybe that's housed in an accelerator or a university incubator, or it's run by a nonprofit, or even could be led by a city or a state. But let's say that biotechnology program has kind of pivoted their programming to really respond to the coronavirus. Maybe they are maybe they're helping entrepreneurs develop contact tracing technologies or vaccines. That would be a really great project example in this bucket of activities. Another interesting example could be an organization that's collecting, vetting, and distributing FDA-approved designs so that in an open source format, so that local communities and programs can partner with makerspaces to create additional PPE. Another interesting example that we've seen quite a bit right now out in the marketplace has been makerspaces that are either partnering with universities or pivoting their programming to allow for making more PPE to get into communities. So these are just a couple of examples we wanted to provide kind of in this bucket of activities. So hopefully hopefully that helps get the wheels turning for some folks who are just tuning in.
Thanks. Our second strategic priority focus area is entrepreneurship support. The idea here is to promote diversification of economies and address specific challenges that entrepreneurs are facing in the community as a result of coronavirus. A few examples are here: helping pivot business models, helping provide resources, etc. Emily, care to give some other examples as well?
Yeah, I think the point we want to hit home here is that there's a lot of work to be done right now in these communities to really help entrepreneurs survive and thrive during this pandemic. And I want to make it really clear that, you know, we are not looking for broad general entrepreneurship support programs like you might see in Build to Scale, for instance. We want to see applications that are very, very targeted in their approach to make sure that they are responding to the economic impacts of coronavirus. That could look a lot of different ways. We've seen interesting mentorship models that have popped up, pairing entrepreneurs with accountants or marketers or other teams to help them kind of weather the storm. We've seen other models where they've pivoted programming to do more digital work with the entrepreneurs to help them pivot their own business models to be more digital or e-commerce friendly, things like that. So the nexus really needs to remain with you know, responding to the pandemic itself.
Great. The third focus area is regional, national, and government connectivity. This strategic priority area is really about leveraging government relationships to support entrepreneurship and innovation, and supporting these relationships and building off them in the region. Again, for all of these, still need a strong need to focus on addressing challenges brought forth by the coronavirus. Emily?
Yeah, we've also seen some fascinating examples in this space. You know, they can take many different forms. This is why we've kind of created these strategic focus areas, but by no means do we want to be prescriptive. We're welcoming all sorts of interesting ideas in this space. But some interesting examples we've seen thus far: statewide entrepreneurship mentor networks being set up to help entrepreneurs navigate this environment, statewide initiatives that are helping connect these entrepreneurs and startups with solutions and resources and other capabilities. There could be programs that are connecting entrepreneurs and investors with federal labs to commercialize technology. So those are just kind of a few examples, you know, in this bucket of activities, but could be lots of different things, and we encourage creativity here.
Thanks, Emily. And our fourth strategic priority focus area is access to capital. We know there's a liquidity crisis for startups right now who need cash flow to survive. While EDA does have a revolving loan fund, we also want to be able to support these startups in innovative financing mechanisms. Emily, do you have a few examples you'd like to share of what that might look like?
Yeah, we've also seen great examples here. You know, I think we're particularly interested in kind of innovative capital models that are helping these businesses through the liquidity crisis, like Amanda mentioned. We've got some organizations experimenting with revenue-based funding models in lieu of venture capital for some of the businesses that are cash strapped, but you know, we'll likely see revenues rebound in the 6 to 8 month time horizon after COVID subsides. You know, there could be, you know, an investment fund focused on opportunity zones or businesses in rural America. Again, it can take many different forms, but I think that the one thing to highlight on the access to capital point here is that we are funding the intermediate organizations. So, you know, that could be an early stage seed fund or a nonprofit, it could be an angel capital network, but we are not able to capitalize the entrepreneurs and the startups themselves. So any of the funds from the Sprint Challenge, you know, they can be used for operational cost, they could be used for marketing and legal due diligence, but they can't be used to actually capitalize a fund itself. So just wanted to also caveat with that point as well.
Thanks, Emily. So those are the 4 strategic focus areas. Again, you're not limited to only these areas. These are areas we've identified as priorities for EDA to maybe give you some inspiration to help build your application around. But really, your project concept needs to focus on addressing the coronavirus pandemic, and also, you know, your region very well. Where are the challenges? What are the needs? and how might they fit into any of these strategic focus areas. Now that we have ideas for programming, it's time to move on to the application. We know that sometimes applications may be a little challenging or overwhelming, so we really wanted to break down the technical components of the application to help you get through that process and present your best case possible for potential funding. That being said, it's very important to pay attention to the technical application. We don't want you to get knocked out of the competition because of a technical mistake. So we're going to walk through this with quite a bit of detail, so stay tuned. First, before we even jump into the application, there's a couple of steps you need to take. First is your organization needs an EIN number. Second, you will need a UEI or DUNS number. Third, your organization will need to be registered with SAM. And fourth and finally, before you can even access the application package, you'll need to create a grants.gov username and password. Once your organization has all these various components checked off, then you're ready to move into the application for the Sprint Challenge. So we've created this quick little application checklist that lists out all the requirements for the application. We've also created a great toolkit that's on our website. We'll have it listed again later in this presentation, but an application checklist that will hopefully make it easy to make sure you got all the documents you needed, all the reports you needed, everything outlined correctly to make sure you're submitting a full and complete application. First, we already checked our eligibility requirements. We talked about that. You'll need to fill out the SF424 form where that information will come in handy. We're going to talk about CEDS alignment in a second. Then you'll need to jump into your project narrative, explaining your project. We'll talk about the budget narrative, and then moving through some of the other required attachments like commitment letters and a few other forms you'll need to fill out as well at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague David Ives at EDA to walk us through a little bit more about the CEDS alignment.
Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk a little bit about the CEDS. As both Emily and Amanda has already mentioned, any application that's submitted for project funding under the Sprint Challenge must be consistent with that region's current CEDS or equivalent EDA accepted regional economic development strategy. And as has already been mentioned, there are requirements. This is a requirement both under the statute and the NOFO, but I wanted to give a little bit of background as to why this is so important to EDA, this linkage between the project and that particular region's CEDS. And it really begins with the concept and the idea that is very foundational to EDA, which is good economic development starts with good economic development planning. And that gets to the notion that we want to be funding projects that are tied to a greater strategy and plan for that particular region, and not just one-off projects. And this runs across the gamut for EDA in our programs. If you think about EDA's role as helping communities and regions build the capacity for economic development, it would make sense, and we strongly believe that it should start with the planning for that capacity building. And that really takes place through our network of 392 economic development districts, as has already been mentioned. And these are mostly groupings of counties or other areas that have come together to say, hey, we have a common set of challenges and assets, and together we can more effectively build the capacity for economic development. And the primary tool that the EDDs use to develop and implement this is the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or the CEDS. And that really should be thought of as a regional blueprint for that particular region, and how that region is going to come together to collectively build the capacity for economic development. It lays out the goals and objectives for that particular region based on the assets and challenges. And it's more than just a document. It's actually a process. I think Brett mentioned this earlier. It's a collaboration between the public, private, nonprofit, and educational sectors focused on identifying and leveraging regional assets. So that kind of gives you an idea of how important the CEDS is to EDA and why it's so important, particularly in this effort, the Sprint Challenge. And I just wanted to quickly cover a couple of key questions that you may have related to this CEDS requirement. And the first is, how do you go about making sure that your project or your planned project aligns with the CEDS? And it starts by getting in touch with Amanda and Emily and the rest of the team with OIE. And they will in turn make connections and introductions to EDA's state points of contact, what we refer to as economic development representatives. And they in turn can help identify whether this particular project falls within an economic development district and what CEDS applies to that particular region. And then they can make the again, connections to potentially that economic development district. The way the CEDS are structured, it's very much a strategy-based plan, as I've mentioned. We've really tried over the last number of years to move away from a planning document that is just a laundry list of projects that particular region wants to see funded. It's very much focused on the strategy, the goals and objectives. So as such, it's very likely that through discussions with the economic development district, you'll be able to see how your particular project, potential project under the Sprint Challenge, would probably fit under one of the goals and objectives within that CEDS. May not always do that, but in many cases it can. And so it really requires that conversation to kind of talk with the EDD and see how that CEDS and your project align. And you can either have information in the project narrative that kind of details how your project aligns to the CEDS after talking with the EDD and reviewing the CEDS, or you can even seek a letter of support from that economic development district that encompasses the impact area of your particular project as another way to kind of show that alignment between your potential project and the CEDS. Another question that you might be thinking is, well, what happens if my project ends up being an area that doesn't have an EDD or a CEDS? 83% of the country is covered by economic development districts. So there's a pretty good chance that your project will fall within an EDD, and all EDDs have a CEDS. So that's a good thing to be, a good place to be. But if not, when you reach out to OIE and then to the EDA state points of contact, even if there isn't an EDD in your particular region, there very well may likely be a funded CEDS that you can then link to, which is the key here. And even in those cases where there isn't a CEDS, there may very well be some other type of regional strategy document, regional strategic planning document focused on economic development that may be able to serve as an equivalent in this case. But again, it starts with that conversation, reaching out to OIE, reaching out to the EDA state points of contact to have that conversation. And then the final question I wanted to hit on was really, what happens if your proposed project should encompass a larger region that may cover multiple economic development districts or perhaps even be statewide? In that instance, what you'll end up needing to do is probably most likely make contact with all the economic development districts that your project would encompass. In that case, it may require multiple CEDS to show alignment. So that's something that you'll have to do as part of that. There are a small number of statewide CEDS that have been developed over the years. So if your project is focused in an entire state, there's a possibility that you may be able to align it with the statewide CEDS versus having to do, say, alignment with all the economic development districts or CEDS within that particular state. So that's something else to explore. But again, not to reiterate it too many times, it starts with that conversation by reaching out to OIE and the EDA state points of contact and potentially the EDDs to have those individual conversations. I also want to quickly point out to a couple of links here. One is to the state points of contact, the EDRs for each state in the country, as well as more information on the CEDS itself, in case you're interested to know more about the CEDS process, and kind of what we think makes a strong CEDS. So with that, I will turn it back to Amanda. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, David. And I know that is a question we've gotten already from folks is, what if I don't have a relationship with my local EDD? And as Dave has pointed out, please just reach out to your state point of contact or to us at OIE, and we can help point you in the right direction. I just wanted to list here the quick fine print that you'll find within the NOFO about the CEDS requirement, and David mentioned it, but you can either lay out how your project aligns with your regional CEDS through the project narrative or through a letter of support. And we'd also encourage you, if possible, to attach that planning document for reference for us as well. So now that we're in alignment with our regional CEDS, it's time to jump into that project narrative. We talked about the 4 strategic focus areas. This is the part where you tell us about your project. This is really quick before we go more into the content. Just want to highlight some of the formatting. I know this is often stressful for me to make sure that everything is aligned. We do have a page limit of 10 pages. Anything beyond 10 pages will not be read or considered as part of the scoring for your application. Please keep your margins no less than ½ inch, and please use a font similar to Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman, etc., and make sure your font size is no less than 11 points so we can read it. So those are just the quick logistics about the project narrative. But the project narrative, as my colleague once said, is really the entree of your application. This is the meat and potatoes, if you will, of what we're looking for. This is where we're going to read about your project. These are some of the components it will include. You'll need to include an executive summary. You'll need to include a list of the location and the region served, your proposed project, a proposed scope of work and timeline for the project, and evidence-based anticipated impacts. So what are your outputs and inputs, outputs, and outcomes you're expecting from this project? How will that address recovery and resilience? And again, some of the funding finance information will need to be included there. There's a lot more details about specifically what each section should include in the NOFO under section D2AI, as noted in the bottom right-hand corner. But this is really where we're going to learn about your project. The other important, another important component of the application is the budget narrative. This we will look at and will help determine how you intend to use your funds, making sure that everything is corresponding accordingly and that there is a match component there. We'll also need you to submit a staffing plan to identify and describe the personnel and their roles, percentage of time devoted to the project, total amount charged. We've actually created an optional budget template. It's listed on our website. It's also listed within the Notice of Funding Opportunity in there, so you can see it. But here's a quick screenshot of part of the budget, but it also includes a budget narrative. So we have a suggested page length of 4 pages for you to explain and kind of spell out how you plan to use the funds and what that looks like for your project. Again, we have a checklist on the website, and we also have this budget template easy, ready to download for you to use. So let's get into match requirements. I just mentioned it briefly. For the sprint challenge, there is a match requirement. The match requirement for this is an 80-20 ratio. So what that means is there are a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, most grantees are required to provide a 20% funding match, meaning the grant can cover up to 80% of total budget. Matching shares can be cash or in kind, but the most important part is that they must be committed to the project for the period of performance. They need to be available as needed, and they must not be conditioned or encumbered in any way that may preclude it from its use consistent with the requirements of the EDA investment assistance. And we'll need you to tell us that as well. There are a couple of exceptional circumstances that I noted. EDA may establish a maximum investment rate of 100% for projects that are from Indian tribes, or projects where the Assistant Secretary determines the applicant has exhausted its effective taxing or borrowing capacity. These are very rare exceptions to the 80-20 match. So unless you fall in one of these rare exceptions where your grant rates can cover 100% of project costs, then you will need to plan on securing a 20% match requirement. It's really important to note that your match requirement follows the same guidelines and principles as the federal component, and that neither federal nor the matching share funds can be invested directly in startups or other companies, whether through equity, debt, or any sort of hybrid mechanism. So how do you tell us about your match? Well, one, it'll be in your budget and your budget narrative, but two, we will also need commitment letters. So we talked earlier about letters of support in terms of government entities, and there may be other community partners who want to express their support as part of your application, part of their application. That letter of support would highlight a collaborative relationship with the partner entity, would show commitment to the project, and explain the relationship and should be signed. A commitment letter will follow all of those, and in addition to, should highlight the specific financial commitment, whether cash or in kind, should list the details of the commitment, including itemized valuations. So for example, if you're using, let's say, accounting services as in kind to support an entrepreneurial community, you would want to itemize out exactly how much their time is valued at, how many hours, that sort of thing, as well as much detail to help make sure we understand what that match, either cash or in kind, is being used for. We need in the commitment letter confirmation that it meets the match requirements, that the funding that is being contributed is unencumbered, available, and committed. And it needs to be signed by an authorized representative. Earlier, we had a slide that said, don't get knocked out for technical mistakes. I will say this is one of the areas that we see a lot of technical mistakes. So it's very important that your match adds up, it's conveyed properly across all your documents, and that there are signed letters of support naming where that match is coming from and the details within that match, and in particular that it's available, committed, and unencumbered. Really quick, just wanted to highlight some of the other technical forms that are part of the application. The first form is the SF424, grants.gov, where you'll find the full application and you will fill out the forms within the grants.gov workspace. I'm pretty sure you can't submit your application without this form. So this is an important one. It highlights all your basic contact information, our kind of first view of your budget and so forth. There's the SF424A, which is a budget form, moving all your budget narrative numbers also into this form. And then we'll also need to make sure that you sign a CEDS 511, which is a certification regarding lobbying. There are some other forms that may not be applicable to 100% of applicants, but I do think they're really important to note here. So there's the SFLLL, which is a disclosure regarding lobbying. There is the Executive Order 12372, which is a compliance document with a state point of contact. If your state is on this list, you will need proof that you are in compliance of that, and you will be able to reach out to your state point of contact, tell them about the project, and they'll let you know if your project is up for review. Any sort of organizational documentations, especially for our nonprofit folks on the call, bylaws, that sort of thing are laid out again in the NOFO. And if you're submitting for indirect costs in your budget, we'll need proof of your negotiated indirect cost rate. So these are all listed. Again, we have a pretty user-friendly checklist we created for our website that can highlight that. So now that you've filled out all the forms, you have a great project proposal, your budget is pulled together, and you have your 20% match requirement. You've submitted your application, congratulations. Now it's time to evaluate. So your application will be scored in equally weighted areas, 10 points each for 6 different areas. So we're gonna walk through that really quick. I'd encourage you when you're writing your application and reviewing it before you submit it to really put yourself in a reviewer's shoes and see what they might be looking for in these areas. The first area is economic and innovation impact. Is your project rapidly addressing economic, health, and safety risks caused by the pandemic? The second area is engagement and diversity. how is your organization and your application, your project, encouraging participation from an inclusive group of regional stakeholders? Are you in an opportunity zone? How are you addressing socioeconomic or various geographic categories within your project? The third area is support and connectivity. Is your project supported and connected to local and regional partners to provide a holistic and strategic approach to the region's entrepreneurship and innovation-related challenges and needs? On the other side of the pie, we have assets and infrastructure. Whether the project has access to or will leverage any assets or infrastructure in the pipeline, as well as resilience and recovery. We've talked a lot about resilience today. What is the extent in which your project will likely assist with the economic resilience and long-term recovery from economic shocks due to the pandemic? And finally, is your project feasible? Does your organization have the ability to execute what you proposed in your application? Really quick, here's a few quick tips for creating a really strong application. First tip, start early. We talked earlier about some of the pre-work before you can even start the application. Some of those do have a timeline in terms of how long different entities can get you an EIN number or a DUNS number. So make sure you start early, you start talking to your community partners if you're going to partner with anyone, and be clear about the deadline. The deadline is December 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. It is a hard deadline. So make sure you start early so you have enough time to get the entire application done. The second tip we have is data. Provide data to support your claims. Propose relevant outcome metrics and provide documentation to back up any of your claims in your application. The third area is, create a really strong value proposition. How can your organization demonstrate any novel or innovative aspects of your approach? And be very clear about your proposition and the components of your program. If we can't understand what you're trying to do in your program, that's going to be a really hard challenge for our scorers. And finally, show support. Show that you have the strong community support. And again, be very, very specific with your commitment letters. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but we have a number of applicant resources readily available for you at eda.gov/OIE/sprint. We've created some video tutorials that walk you through some of those technical forms we talked about and give little tips and tricks. We have a budget narrative template ready for you to go right on our website. We have a list of frequently asked questions that will hopefully address your needs. We've also created an applicant checklist. On the right, you'll see this is the section of that website of where you can find all that information. We even have a link directly to the grants.gov funding opportunity there, and just a PDF as well of the funding opportunity outside of grants.gov. Timeline, probably another question you have by now. Application period opened a couple weeks ago on October 14th. You're at the live webinar today, and our application period closes, again, December 3rd, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll spend the winter reviewing and scoring, and we're hoping to have award announcements in the spring. And that's when the project will start for those who are awarded. And again, important reminders, application deadline, December 3rd. Here we also listed the grants.gov funding opportunity number. In case you don't go directly to our EDA website, you can copy this here and search for it on grants.gov so it's readily available to you. And again, there's our website and our email if you have any questions. And now we're going to move into question portion of the presentation. And we actually have a few FAQs that we prepared, so we're going to start with those, and then we'll pull up any questions from the chat that are relevant as well. So the first question is, my organization is a for-profit entity. Can I apply for a grant?
We've hit this one pretty hard, so hopefully I won't need to spend too much time on this, but the answer is no. We cannot fund individual for-profit startups or businesses. You'll notice we reiterate the eligible entities down here. Hopefully we've hit those home quite a bit. If you find yourself in a questionable scenario, I've got a few questions that I haven't been able to address yet in the chat, 501c6s and things like that, and you're unsure, please email us, oie@eda.gov, and we will work with you to determine your eligibility early.
And we talked about this a bit as well, but just want to reiterate, I'm not sure if my region has a CEDS. Is this a requirement to apply? And I'll also add on to that, if you don't have a relationship with your local EDD, what does that look like, Emily?
Yeah, the CEDS alignment is a requirement. And so, if your region doesn't have a CEDS, just about every region does have what we call a CEDS equivalent document. And if you're unsure about what that CEDS equivalent document looks like, or if you're not familiar with your economic development district, get in touch with us. We will get you in touch with the right person, whether that's one of our economic development representatives or connecting you directly with the EDD resources. We'll make sure that you get set up for success. It is required. You need to have this CEDS alignment both in your project narrative and also including a link or a document for the CEDS itself in your application. So please know that that is a technical requirement to submit the application.
Thanks, Emily. My organization has a national footprint. Will I still be competitive for this program?
Yeah, I've gotten this question in the chat already by some folks. In short, I think the answer here is that it will be very difficult for a national organization to successfully submit an application because we have the requirement to align with CEDS. CEDS are regional in nature, and that is really the intent of the Sprint Challenge here, is really to have locally and regionally driven projects that are authentic to your community. So the answer there is it's not impossible, but it would take alignment with CEDS across the entire country, which would be pretty difficult to do. If you're unsure about how to approach that, whether that's a statewide project or a multi-region project, those are definitely possible. Please get in touch with us again, and we can work with you to determine best next steps on that.
Great. Will I be more competitive if I focus on one specific program focus area of the 4 named earlier over another?
Yeah, the answer is no. We don't have any quotas here based on those 4 focus areas. I think we laid those out as kind of the strategic priorities of the challenge. And I've gotten some questions about, can we be doing manufacturing? Could it, do we have to be doing specifically high growth technology? We are looking for innovation and entrepreneurship support efforts to respond to the pandemic, and that can look a lot of different ways. So we would encourage you to really read the full notice of funding opportunity. We can't cover it all here, we're trying, but the NOFO itself will give you a lot more in-depth insight into kind of what we're looking for, and we're always available to answer your questions as well.
Great. We are working hard to identify the best type of match for a strong proposal. What recommendations do you have, and do you have a preference of cash or in kind for match contributions?
No preference. We do not have a preference over cash or in kind. It's not a factor in the competitiveness of a project. Amanda went pretty in depth on those 6 evaluation criteria. So when we talk about competitiveness of a project, keep in mind that those evaluation criteria are what we're going to use to evaluate a project. But on the match question itself, look, the best type of match are those that effectively advance the project. So, be thoughtful about what will make your project go the furthest and try to secure that match.
Great. Again, another question about match. If I bring more than the required match, will that make me more competitive?
Yeah, the answer here is no, not necessarily. Extra matching shares, again, it's not a factor in the competitiveness of a project. So again, if your organization feels that it's able to expend that match, in concurrence with your federal amount, you can bring it, but it won't be a factor in the competitiveness.
Great. It is important just to reiterate that you do meet the 20% match if that's the qualification that your organization falls under. Meeting the full 20% is important though. Can innovation prizes or grants to startup companies be funded under the Sprint Challenge?
Yeah, this is a question we've gotten a lot, and I think it will dovetail with the next question that we're going to address. But the answer here is no. So Sprint Challenge award funds cannot be passed to for-profit companies receiving services. So, you can't do innovation prizes or grants that essentially act as a pass-through to those companies. So the money that an organization will receive under the Sprint Challenge, that's going to be used for really funding your operations, your program management, things like that. So it's really important to note that it can't be passed through to startups. It also can't be used to capitalize a fund of any kind, whether that's equity, debt, or hybrid. So just keep it in mind, it's operating. And I've also gotten a few questions in the chat about subawarding to other organizations. You certainly can include a subaward in your scope of work, but it's important to note that if you're going to subaward, it must be an eligible entity that you're subawarding to. So it's got to fit those exact eligible entity types that we walked through earlier. The nonprofits, the institutions of higher ed, the EDDs, the cities, states, local political subdivisions of the state. It's got to be Indian tribes. It's got to be one of those eligible entity types if you're going to subaward.
Great. And that was the next question, which you just addressed.
Yeah, and we just wanted to show this chart. Again, you're going to be able to find this chart. It's included in our frequently asked questions document that we have posted on the Sprint website. So highly encourage. I know Amanda's already hit this home, but we have a lot of applicant resources on the Sprint website. So please check there. You'll see we differentiate between what's required of a co-applicant, a sub-awardee, and what we would consider a contract. If you want to work with the business that will provide services, that's considered a contract, and that has to meet certain requirements in 2 CFR, which we won't get into details on this webinar, but just wanted to briefly show here that we can answer any questions, technical questions, if you've got any as you begin to prepare your applications on this point.
Thanks, Emily. And then one more question about matching. As I mentioned earlier, I know this is a sticking point and a challenge sometimes technically for applicants. So may applicants use funds from other federal awards to be used as a matching share for the Sprint Challenge?
Yeah, in general, the answer there is no. In general, funds received from other federal awards are not allowed to be used as matching share. What it really comes down to is the other federal awards must have some specific language in their statute governing that award that allows it. It's very, very rare that other federal awards can be used. If you have a question about this, this is another great example of one to really email us because we'll have to probably get a second opinion from a lawyer on this one. So please email us those type of questions early, so hopefully we can get you a response that you can use for your application.
Great. Emily, were there other questions that you wanted to bring up?
Lots of questions. I think we've hit the high points of a lot of the questions in the chat. I tried to answer some of you. I know I didn't get to everybody. We were just completely overwhelmed. I think we might have hundreds of questions in here. But please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Amanda and the whole team have really put together a fantastic toolkit for our applicants. Please visit the website. Please read the notice of funding opportunity. It really is the North Star for the program. And remember, applications are due December 3rd, 2020, which is coming up, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. And thanks so much for joining today. We really appreciate it.